Welcome back to my channel. In the first episode, we traced how the great northern coalition of Vikings, Scots and Britons converged on the Calder and Brun valleys on their way to York, whilst Æthelstan's army intercepted them before they managed to break out of the Pennine Ridge. In today's video, we'll examine how the battle itself unfolded, mapped onto the ground we know today as the town of Burnley. Everything you'll hear is drawn directly from my book, Brunanburh, a Burnley Battlefield, where I argue that the decisive engagement of 937 AD was fought in Burnley. Before Burnley became the industrial town we know today, it was little more than a scatter of farmsteads clinging to the ridges above the rivers. Its name has changed over centuries, from Brunley, Brunley, and finally to Burnley. All are rooted in the same Old English elements: Brun, meaning the brown or dark river, and Lea, a woodland clearing. The town literally means the clearing by the brown river. There's only one River Brun in England, which is the one that flows through Burnley. Every other similar name comes from Burna, meaning a brook or spring, not from Brun, meaning brown in Old English. That linguistic distinction makes one of the strongest early arguments for locating Brunanburh here in Burnley. The fort by the Brown River, geographically unique. When we combine the known route and direction of the Norse advance with Æthelstan's probable positioning, Burnley begins to make far more sense as the battlefield. Add to that the town's own nomenclature of Daneshouse, Saxifields, Pike Hill and Worsthorne, then the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Each name reflects echoes of ethnicity, conflict and landscape. The Danes on one side, the Saxons on the other, the hills and ridges where armies once stood. This no longer looks like a quiet patchwork of medieval farmsteads. It reads instead as a landscape of memory, a place whose very language preserves the story of a battle fought on its ground. When we look deeper into the landscape, it also lends itself perfectly. From west to east, the ground rises gently from Daneshouse towards Saxifields and Briarcliff. The River Brun runs along the lower right, joining the Calder. In 937, this river and the thick woodland of Hesandford formed a natural barrier. To the north, open ridges climbed toward Pendle Hill. To the south, forested ground offered cover and confusion. The slope between Daneshouse and Saxifields, now crossed by roads and housing, was then an open incline, perfect for a field engagement on a large scale. At Daneshouse gathered the combined host of Olaf Guthfrithson, Constantine of Alba, and the Britons of Northumbria, a mixed army of Norse heavy infantry, Irish spearmen, Scots, and cavalry from the western kingdoms, under the command of Owain of Strathclyde. Their right rested on the River Brun and the Hesandford forest. Their left extended toward Pendle Hill, exposed and open. Æthelstan's English army occupied the higher ground of Saxifields. It was a composite force, household guards from Wessex, Mercians under experienced thanes, and Northumbrian allies. From their position they could see the entire valley, the enemy camps, and the river's course. The high line gave them the defensive advantage. Before dawn on the day of the battle, the allied leaders of Olaf Guthfrithson of Dublin, Owain of Strathclyde, and Constantine of Alba planned a bold strike. A small band crept up the slope under cover of the trees, hoping to find Æthelstan's tent and cut the head from the English host before battle started. The story survives that Olaf himself, disguised as a travelling bard, had walked among the Saxon fires earlier that night, testing the camp's watchfulness. If so, the plan nearly worked. The raiders fell upon the tents where they believed the king slept, but Æthelstan had moved his position only hours before. The blades that came through the canvas found not the king, but Bishop Werstan of Sherborne, newly arrived and asleep on the very ground Æthelstan had left. The bishop was cut down with his retinue. His cries rang through the darkness. The alarm spread fast. The English guards rallied, led by 2 Norsemen in Æthelstan's own pay, Egil and Thorolf Skallagrimsson. In the confusion of the night, they met the attackers head-on. The fight was brief, close, and savage. Thorolf is said to have killed the raiders' captain in single combat, before the rest fled back toward the river. When silence returned, the king was alive, and the night raid had failed. As the grey first light crept across the slopes, the first battle horn sounded. Æthelstan placed his most seasoned West Saxon warriors in the centre beneath the Wessex banner of a dragon. To the left, near the low ground by the Brun, stood Chancellor Turketul with Londoners and Mercians. On the right, Thorolf led mixed Norse and English companies. Egil commanded the spearhead in the centre. Across the valley, Olaf mirrored the formation. His own Norse veterans in the middle, Scots to the right, Irish and Britons to the left. Then the shield walls closed. The impact echoed across the valley like thunder on stone. For a time, neither side gave ground. The English right held firm along the trees. The left heaved back and forth near the boggy flats. At the centre, Egil's line locked shields against Olaf's household troops. Turketul, the fighting priest, swung a great axe and led a charge that burst through the coalition's left. There, amid Scots and Norse from the Isles, he cut down Constantine's son. The death of the heir threw the Scots into confusion. Constantine himself barely escaped, his guard dragging him from the press. On the opposite flank, Thorolf saw the enemy weakening and pressed forward too far. Keeping a large woods that sat on lower slopes on his right, he tried to swing behind Olaf's centre. Hidden riders burst from the trees, men of the coalition reserve under a Norse earl later called Adils. They caught Thorolf's small group in the flank. In the melee, Thorolf was struck by several spears and fell. His banner dipped. For a moment, the English right wavered. Egil saw the movement from the centre, knew instantly what it meant, and broke from the line. Charging across the field, he reached his brother's company and found Thorolf's body at the forest edge. In a surge of fury, he rallied the survivors, shouting, "For Thorolf!" and drove straight back into the enemy. Earl Adils fell beneath his sword, and with him the last of the Scots' courage. The flank collapsed. Egil's counter-attack rolled along the wood and into the rear of Olaf's line. By midday, the battle was closing on 3 sides. Turketul's men wheeled inward from the left, Egil's vengeful band struck from the right, and Æthelstan's centre pressed forward with renewed strength. Surrounded and exhausted, the coalition ranks broke. The rout poured downhill toward the river and west along the Calder. Many were cut down at the crossings near Ightenhill. Others fled toward the coast and the waiting ships. Olaf escaped with a few survivors, sailing back to Dublin in defeat. Constantine of Scotland retreated north, his son dead behind him. The field around Saxifields and the valleys below were thick with the dead. The chronicles say 5 kings and 7 earls fell that day, along with thousands of men. For weeks afterwards, carrion birds darkened the sky above the valley. The victors buried their own on the higher ground. The Norse dead were carried out onto the moor and laid beneath cairns above the Everidge Clough, the same ground where Egil's saga says he buried his brother before returning to York. When you stand today on the slope from Daneshouse to Saxifields, you can still trace the battle's shape. The river running at your right, the ridges where the lines met, the moor beyond where the dead were buried. These are not distant places. They are the bones of Burnley itself. Here, beside the brown river that gives the town its name, the fate of England was fought and decided. The Battle of Brunanburh. In the next episode, we'll turn from the battlefield to the town itself, to Burnley's own landscape of memory. We'll look at how the places we walk today still carry echoes of that ancient fight. The stones that mark forgotten graves, the old crosses in the churchyard, and new monuments. The cairns and grave markers of Saxon and Norse, and the royal house that once stood at Ightenhill. Together, they form the quiet evidence that the story of Brunanburh never truly left this valley.